How are you? Dave Ford here with the legendary John Holm from Pyxera Global. How you doing, my friend?
I'm doing well, legendary Dave Ford.
You are the 20th episode of the SoulBuffalo Earth Report. We're super excited to have you. We have all kinds of exciting things to talk about that span the entire globe. But maybe just to give a little bit of context, John and I met, like so many other folks that we know in the plastic ecosystem, in the middle of the Atlantic Gyre on our Ocean Plastic Leadership Summit last May. And dude, good to see you. It's exciting to talk about everything we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, it's really cool. I mean, it's always nice to talk to a fellow Bermuda Triangle person. So that's great.
Well, before we jump into sort of the nuts and bolts of everything that you guys are working on at Pyxera, how did you get into sustainability? And maybe you can also share a little bit about Pyxera and your mission.
A lot there. I'll try to unwind it. So Pyxera Global, first of all, I mean, we've been around for roughly now 30 years, working at the intersection of the public, private, and social sectors, really working behind the scenes and tri-sector partnership to develop world-class partnerships to solve solvable problems. And in that context, you know, we've operated in over 100 countries. We have 5 offices globally, but we're kind of hidden in the sense that we really work on partnership in the truest sense to really solve social problems, and working really deeply with the private sector to kind of create shared value and innovate on designing business solutions. So,
let me stop you for it's
yeah.
When I first heard about Pyxera Global, before I ever met you, I was talking to one of our partners. I don't know if we can say their name, but they're a big, giant international computer company.
Yes.
And I talked to one of their lead people, and they had gone on a deep dive with Pyxera in, I think it was Kazakhstan, where they were immersed with a local government in Kazakhstan and like helping them fix infrastructure. I was just like, you guys are super cool. A, I want to go to Kazakhstan, and B, just giving that kind of opportunity for these like long-term, I mean, they're like 5-week sabbaticals, or at least the program that this guy.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, one thing we really focus on is influence, and I think one thing we really cut the niche on with our vision that we have and our leader, Deirdre White, was really looking at, you know, working with the private sector and big companies, really Fortune 100 companies, and going on a leadership journey of taking these folks, putting them on the ground, and generally, I hate the hashtag emerging market, but going to a developed an emerging economy or emerging market, linking them with a nonprofit, and then having them work with the local nonprofit and identifying a problem to solve, and customizing that many times to what the business wants to, and then capture those learnings and bring those learnings back home, while also really reinforcing that nonprofit standing on the ground to create longer and more meaningful impact. And, you know, we've been doing that now, gosh, over 12, 13, 14 years with like you named the companies, probably we've done it with them. And I think, you know, there's a lot of insight to that. And I think that speaks volumes to also kind of how we work behind the scenes on partnership.
That's amazing. So you came in to build a circular economy practice.
You know, that's a long story to unwind. I'm a private sector guy, so I'm an entrepreneur. I started my work in Central and Eastern Europe. You know, I launched a Subway sandwich chain as an entrepreneur and startup in Hungary, scaled it to 22 restaurants, and then helped Starbucks and IKEA make their market entry into markets. And I just fell in love with that intersection of business and society. Got into this concept of shared value. And I think one thing that's really unique is that once you make money, and then you know you can solve social problems by even making more money and being strategic with it, like you cannot ever go back. Like you can never go back to just making money anymore. Like you just can't do it. So I fell in love with this space. And then there was this lady I met named Deirdre White, who's CEO of Pyxera Global. And it was just really interesting in 2013, meeting at the Shared Value Leadership Consulting Group in London, and watching this organization called Pyxera Global and the amazing team that they had, the team of people who are just rock stars solving world problems without having any ego. And I'm like, huh? What? And so she and I, you know, became friends. And then about 2 years later, decided I gotta go work here. I gotta get in this. And then what I do here is really kind of incubate, and to a degree with our great team, really build out our new initiatives. And in circular economy and sustainability, I'll be quite honest, I didn't have a sustainability background, but I had the idea of working on systemic issues and seeing complex problems and wanting to love partnership and working on solving that. So I've been now, yes, knee deep in circular though for like 2.5 years. It consumes me.
And you're building massive coalitions. Let's talk about Chicago and what you're doing there.
Yeah, Circular Chicago Coalition. So, you know, here's the rough of it, is that about 2 years ago, Bridget Croak from Closed Loop Partners and I were having a discussion, and it went around something like this. If we really want to truly create a circular city, not the corporate social responsibility aspect of, oh, it's circular, but a real circular city, what would that look like in the United States, and what would have to happen to make that a reality? And so really, when we scratched the surface, you know, came up with this proposition that, first of all, you have to have an economic model that is inclusive to everyone. The current take, make, waste linear model is not inclusive. It is exclusive. It's designed for the top 10%, and we're seeing that divide more and more every single day. On top of that, you have to put in a business model that focuses on the reduce, the reuse, the regenerative aspects of circular economy, and not plastic, just plastic alone, not just recycling alone. That is not the reality of what a true circular economy looks like. The third thing you have to look at is then a really deep relationship with the public and private sector. In the United States, not only is there not any federal legislation for circular economy, you almost have anti-circular legislation, where you have many states, as you well know, where you can't even put on anti-plastic legislation. So what we decided is that you have to focus on a city that has a mayor that's progressive, that could actually put in incentives around what I just mentioned, around economic mobility in marginalized communities, around new circular business models, and get it. You have to then focus on going from a state into the federal level for policy. And so we created this coalition to design Chicago because of its standing in the Great Lakes region, because of how many Fortune 100 companies are there. And three, just because of also, I mean, if you look at the south and west side of Chicago, there's a lot of social injustice that's happening there all the time, just like around the world. But it was something we looked at with Mayor Lightfoot and the partners that we had going, we need to create this coalition. It's a great place to start. And from that first conversation to now, it's exploded. We've brought on partners like NL, for example, which, you know, their CEO signed up saying they're going to be a knowledge partner. We have organizations on the ground in Chicago like Reaply and Plant Chicago and Delta Institute. And then we have big scale organizations like Arizona State University. We have John Elkington, the author of Green Swan from Volans, wanting to play along, and he's a knowledge partner. So it's a really true coalition that's been formed, and we're looking to make a really nice map for the United States to follow. So,
and what's going to be on that map? Ideally, what's the crux of towards?
Sure. So I think first of all, when we look at the circular economy, it's not just an economic model; it's a transition to a new model that's just, and that's massive. And so what we're trying to say is that, you know, James George, who you've talked to before, is a good friend. You know, say complex problems deserve complex solutions, and this is complex. So when we look at what we envision the following. First, we're going to focus on the south and west side of Chicago. We're going to do a deep dive assessment on what are the business opportunities to not gentrify the south and west side of Chicago, but really go in and really look at it as a way to upskill and retool the local environment to be owned by the local community for the circular transition, on how to look at product as a service models, how to look at reuse, how to look at regenerative qualities, and put in some, hopefully some incentives to allow that to happen on the ground. The next thing, what we're going to do there is really work, hopefully, because we haven't got yet the buy-in yet from the city. We're looking to do that relatively, hopefully soon, but, you know, work to put some incentives in place to allow that to happen, while also looking at the private sector to come in and say, okay, here's an opportunity to innovate and incubate new business ideas. Maybe you want to try out some biopackaging ideas, put it there, maybe some incentives around that. Maybe there's some education opportunities that we can put it on the ground. So what we have is a tier of partners called Inclusive Education Partners. That includes Arizona State University, Bard College, which is part of the Open Society University Network. And we're talking already to 3 other organizations in Chicago now about putting inclusive education in those communities around, built for BIPOC, to actually tool them to understand what the circular economy means. So it's a systems change. It's a redesign, and we'll see.
It's amazing. I mean, and it's interesting. You look at what's happened since the pandemic hit in cities and around the world, for sure. And we're going to talk about Ghana, and we're going to talk about the work you're doing in Alaska. But like, for example, I'm from Baltimore, and proudly from Baltimore. They just suspended curbside recycling because of budget cuts for pandemic. And 240,000 households, you know, and that is a direct correlation of budget cuts. And we're looking at, you know, that happening all over the place, right? And that is, pretty big problem, especially when you're talking about circular economy. If you can't get this material to put it back into the system, and if it's just going to landfill. So, you know, I think what's happening here, what's happening around the world right now, I mean, it's never been really more important. I mean, it's just like we're in a bad way. We got to figure this out in a hurry.
No, and I think that's why the public-private sector collaboration is essential, because the public sector doesn't have the funds to actually build the infrastructure that's workable. They don't have the ability to invest in it. The private sector has to work together in a cohesive partnership to be able to do that, right? And you're 100% correct too. I mean, you know, COVID, as you wrote so well, and by the way, thank you for your article in Scientific American on providing a true snapshot of what the COVID reality is. That was brilliant, by the way, on waste. I mean, what we said in Bermuda, just like it amplified like times 20, it seems, because of COVID-19. And I think there's going to be ramifications from that. So thank you for, again, doing your work that you're doing there at SoulBuffalo.
So when we were in Bermuda and when we were out there on that ship trapped together for 4 days with all kinds of people that didn't agree, you met a lot of people that have brought one of really incredible global initiative to life. I love the deep dive and sort of like the how that came to be. It's Zero Plastic Waste Community in Pyxera, Ghana, which is super cool. So yeah, tell us about that.
Well, I think what you did, Dave, was really unique. You got disparate personalities that won't be together in a room, and you got everybody in a room and forced them to be isolated. And I think that was really healthy and really good. And I think, you know, what came out of that for us is that, you know, we met some of our partners. Now we talk on a daily basis, whether that's, you know, Ian Rosenberger and Vivian Wook from First Mile, and the great work they're doing around race pickers. Existing partnerships
in Haiti, the incredible work down there.
Yeah, they're amazing, right? And also, you know, while we had existing relationships with Dow and SAP, I mean, now those relationships have just become 20 million times tighter. And so I think, you know, one thing that we all have a common, we all have different points of view of what's important, but I think there's a common aim of trying to solve this problem. And you know, on that boat, what was really interesting is our CEO, Deirdre White, you know, she gets up, and if you remember correctly, we're doing moonshots at night. Like, okay, what are we going to promise out on this? And then Deirdre gets up in all of her glory and says, we're going to create zero plastic waste communities in India. And I'm just sitting there going, here we go. And what was really fascinating is, of course, when Deirdre put that moonshot out there, the conversation started going. And that's what's great about being on with all these wonderful energies on the boat, was the conversations happened, the conversations were sparked. And I think what happened there is that, you know, Marcus Erickson from 5 Gyro said, hey, John, Alaska. I'm like, yeah, Alaska, let's talk about that. You know,
so Marcus Erickson, real quick, he's been on this program. He was our expedition leader on the ship. He's done more ocean plastic expeditions than I think pretty much anyone. He was like Charlie Moore, the guy that discovered the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, was like his mentor, and he was one of his early, Marcus was one of his early sort of right-hand men, for lack of a better way to put it. And yeah, so Marcus knows plastic waste like no other. So, and then when he was talking about Alaska, it was just about how do you get this waste off of small remote islands, right?
Yeah, so I guess let's get into the details a little bit. There's 2 projects that originated from the boat trip with you, right? That we would not have been able to put together without you convening that group of people. And I think, you know, I want to talk about a couple of those. I think the first one I want to lean into is, you know, what we found on the boat is that we really developed and really tightened our circular economy proposition as an organization. And I think what we do is, when we look at all the circular economy work, whether that's in Chicago or in Alaska or Ghana, it's an inclusive circular economy proposition where any geography we go into, we focus on the marginalized community in that community and focus the business development efforts on them. And then look at KPIs around economic mobility and improving lives and livelihoods for that marginalized community. And so when you look at Alaska, it's really proud to, because this isn't the first time we've announced this publicly. We got approval for zero plastic waste community in Nome, Alaska, in Tribal Nation Nome, Alaska, and in Lake County, Montana, working with Tribal Nation there. On top of that, in Alaska, we're building a reverse logistics hub, coastal reclamation hubs. Thank you, Marcus Erickson, for the guidance, in Seward, Sitka, and Nome as well. To provide a drop-off point. As you know, the ocean plastic issues in Alaska is horrible. A lot of it gets incinerated. a hub where you can drop this off. It can be turned into product, right? And our partners with that, okay? So yes, we're always collaborating with SAP on the tech, but also First Mile, Ian coming with us that we mentioned earlier. We're also bringing a group from Amsterdam called Metabolic. We're also bringing in this rockstar group you may have heard of called Hatch with Yaro Craner and Jared Silverman. They're helping us in Montana. Yeah, your rockstar group that you brought in that convened it. I mean, you know, I'm Montanan in the background, Yaro and the team, and that just obviously matched. So he's a part of it. And then Jeff Wooster from Dow is the one behind the scenes saying, I applaud this, and they're providing the funding for us to do it. And so, you know, we're totally geeked to be a part of this and be able to do it. And that's one of them. Not only that, we're announcing this also the first time. We also on that boat, yes, we talked about Takoradi Ghana. What we're doing there is in partnership with First Mile, again, Ian and Vivian, Recycle Up Ghana, a great organization on the ground there, and working really hard on creating a zero plastic waste community in Takoradi Ghana, with visions of building a reverse logistics hub connecting Cape Coast, Ghana, and then beyond, maybe for the continent of Africa. Again, in partnership with Adwoa Coleman, our big cheerleader with Dow in Ghana, actually in Ghana and Africa, and Jeff Wooster, of course, is support. Again, also with SAP collaborating there as well. So, I mean, you know, on that boat, all those stakeholders were apparent. And I think what's just been great coming out of it, Dave, of what you've built, the infrastructure, what you've built for our organization and the partnerships that I speak to on a daily basis, I can say either are indirectly or directly attributed to the Ocean Plastic Leadership Network.
Amazing, man. Well, that's why we built it. So that's I'm glad to hear that we're, you know, been useful and contributing. I mean, it's just really this program specifically exciting just because it tackles, you know, in some really, like you said, like in some remote regions, well, on the Alaska side of things for sure, but the marginalized community. Well, so like how maybe use one of the two examples. I mean, because I know similar programs, but if you're, you know, in tribal nations, in Nome, how does this affect you? How does this program, when it's totally built, going to be, are the local communities going to be able to use it?
Yeah, I mean, that's the key thing. I think when we look, you have to first of all look at Pyxera Global's mantra. When we look at development, most times development is done to a community. Here's the intervention, here's what we're going to give you, and here's what you're going to do, right? That doesn't work. It generally never scales, it never works, and it's just against everything we believe in. When we look at development, we actually work on engagement. And so what this looks like for us, let's use Alaska and our great organization that we're working with, Kawarak in Nome, who's our partner on the ground there, is really, it's a true partnership where our job is to really listen to them and take the pulse of the local community, identify what their relationship is to plastic, identify what their relationship is to the circular economy, and then put in interventions that they want on the ground, that they view are the most sustainable for them to scale. And so what we would imagine coming out of this at a high level, because we really don't know yet, would be, you know, a reverse logistics hub that potentially could benefit the locals in a way where, imagine waste coming in, plastic waste coming in, and they're profiting off it. In a perfect world, what we would want with Tribal Nation, and what I think would be great for them, is that their waste becomes their money that they sell to others. And they can use that in a way where they have ownership of it. And I think that's a great narrative. But again, we're going to see. It's up to them to help guide us to find out what those interventions are. And what would happen after that is they have ownership of these interventions. They have ownership of the investment, and they would also hopefully have their lives and livelihoods improved, and economic mobility would rise and inclusion would rise. So there.
Same principle in Ghana. So working with the local community to help turn waste into dollars for local people there and help get more of that waste back into a circular stream.
Yes, and I think with waste pickers too, what's wonderful, especially with your network and the great folks like Meridian and others who are doing a great job in the space, is that, you know, there's a coalition there around waste pickers, which can be amplified too. And so again, though, the same concept. What do you want on the ground? What does it look like for you? I think with waste pickers, what we're already hearing based on what Ian and the team's done in Haiti, for example, is, you know, how can we remove the middlemen? How can you make the waste pickers directly having lives improved immediately, have income go up quicker and faster than having a bunch of scavengers trying to get into the profit? So
yeah, and just for those that may not know about waste pickers, there's 15 million people, mostly in the developing world, global south, that are basically spending a huge amount of their time in landfills. in informal dumps in the environment that are picking up waste, plastic otherwise, and that's how they're feeding their families at the end of the day. They're selling them to secondary markets or secondary vendors. They might not be getting good prices. They're really, with what happened with COVID, they're not in a lot of ways, because the price disparity between secondary plastics and virgin has expanded significantly because because of the commodity markets in the world. So these people are, really, kind of across the world, marginalized, as you mentioned, but super important. Like they are keeping the waste out of the environment.
Completely. And I think that, one thing that's we have to look at, and what we have to do, Dave, a better job of, is when we look at consumers and consumerism itself, and you look at the US market, which we're responsible a lot for the waste in the world, right? Because of our consumption habits, is, how do we get people to understand and know the value chains? When you see companies making their commitments, and that's a whole different story on commitments, but, where is that plastic being sourced, and how do we tell the story of the people sourcing it? I think what's amazing, what SAP is doing, is looking at the blockchain of being able to tell that story. I know what we're looking to do in Alaska is imagine being able to blockchain where we're recycling it from, and that we can say that, yes, this is going to be recycled from tribal nation, no. And this is a story behind it. This is a story behind the lives of those people and what the waste looks like. I think the quicker we can make an emotional connection to that waste and the story it does, not only is it going to sell more, I mean, that's, that's very easy to sell differently, but I think there's an education aspect that needs to be out there on the human cost of waste, good and bad.
The humanity element, it's like, how do you marry, that's like, we're looking at this, like, how do you marry the science and the humanity, right? Yeah. What the science is telling us is that we got to get everything figured out, like, in a hurry. We have to absolutely, like,
we're past time.
Breaking the Plastic Wave report, we had Yanni Sharon on. He really went deep with that. That's an amazing report that came out this year. Like, in order to fix this in 20 years, in order to fix it, like 80% of the problem, we need to absolutely scale every solution up across the board, like, dramatically in no time fast. So that, and then you marry that with the humanity and the human cost and, like, what's happening. I mean, really, marginalized communities are the ones that are bearing the brunt. We all are to some degree, but, like, if you get into, a lot of these countries where there's this informal sector of waste pickers, I mean, it's like, it's how can we focus on the human front, focus on the science front to just, like, drive everything so much faster.
Yeah. And I think one thing we're trying to do is remove the narrative, right? I think in the United States, one thing that's really, really challenging is the machine behind the illusion of the circular economy. I think what you have here, the conversation in the United States, people don't even know what really the circular economy is. You ask what, Ellen MacArthur's version, I mean, only probably 10%, 5% probably know what it is. Gary Cooper, the CEO of Reaply, who's the archetype, I would think, of circular Chicago, he made a great point. He's like, it's not the circular economy, it's the connect economy. And what we really need to do is connect incomes and lives and livelihoods to a system that works for everyone. And I think one thing we see in the United States is that, if you look at recycling, for example, and this is an example in the south side of Chicago, a steel recycling plant goes in to the south side of Chicago, which is majority Black, right? Majority marginalized communities on incomes. And the talk is how many jobs it's going to create, but not to talk about the environmental cost to those folks where a recycling plant is going to take. And that, of course, where they're investing it is in the poorest part of the city. And I think that illusion, that narrative, that's what we're trying to tackle, is let's get to the science of it. Let's cut out all the noise, all the public relations schemes. Let's get to the true element of how to have a just and, I think, equal economic opportunity for all. And I think, when you look at the plastic game, as you're saying with with waste pickers, all of it, it's not on a silo, right, Dave? It's education, it's inclusiveness, it's healthcare, it's everything. It's massive.
You're right. Well, and I think the social justice component to all this, and I think that's like, you got movements like the Break Free from Plastic movement, which is like thousands of environmental NGOs that are like at that, are, a lot of times really working hard against industry efforts and to some degree against, building and advanced technologies to recycle, that, that it's definitely a hot button, but the social justice element is really central to that movement, right?
Absolutely.
It's not just about, a circular economy. It's about, what about the people in the communities where these new plants are being built, or the people in Southeast Asia where that live around where this infrastructure would come in. They may or may not, depending on the technology, be good for these people's health and like that health. So anyway, it's definitely, it gets tricky. It's so big. It's so
massive. It is.
What are you most excited about? Like, what are you most excited about, in this field in general? I know I kind of a loaded question. You got a lot on your plate that's pretty exciting.
Man, I mean, it is meeting amazing people and amazing change makers. Like every day I get to talk to the Gary Coopers, the Ava Glodeks.
What is Reaply? Tell me more about Reaply.
Yeah, I mean, so Reaply is a startup. It's now an official member of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. But I think the thing about them is they're a software. They're a tech company working on reuse, right? So it's a system, like a materials exchange platform. And
so like a loop from TerraCycle, where you take back your Haagen-Dazs.
Not take back, more like sharing it. Imagine Northwestern University has PPE, right? A load of that PPE, and the city of Chicago needs it. The city of Chicago can go to the platform and say, yes, I need this amount of PPE. I'll pay this amount. Can I come and get it? And it's done. Like, you can barter a transaction in real time. And the reason why I say city of Chicago is Gary and the team have done that. But I think even more about what's amazing about Reaply and Gary is the work that they've done, for example, with the South Side of Chicago, working with Mayor Lightfoot on putting together a program right now for BIPOC communities. So Black and Hispanic-owned businesses, majority in South and West Side, where they're going to provide incentives to help design businesses to get online because they don't have the funds to do it. And so help them to get them online during COVID, to give them support to move them to a platform which they don't have the funds to do that. Really? And I think thinking behind a little bit about how to engage and how businesses can engage communities together, that's kind of the vision of how we have to move forward. And I want to say one thing here about the private sector. I think one thing that we really have to do well is that when you mention public sector incentives, it doesn't have to be at the behest of not making a profit. Like if you see Philips in Amsterdam, they don't sell light bulbs. They sell light as a service. They sell to Schiphol Airport or the city of San Francisco lighting. I think what we need is innovation now again, in a way where we're not just making a bunch of products, but we're selling a service of something instead. And I think there's so much innovation out there, Dave. We just have to find it. And I think in plastics, in the space that we're in, there's a lot of innovation to be had, and companies out there really trying to do some really good stuff.
I was actually just on the phone with John Warner, the father of green chemistry, today. You want to talk about innovation? That guy just blows my mind every time I talk. Anyway.
Yeah, it's like we get to talk to these people, right? Mm-hmm. Like you asked me what the coolest thing is being able to talk to these folks and be a part of their network and try to solve social problems. That's all right.
So last question: if you had an opportunity to meet anyone in the world, like environmental superhero style, who would you sit down with?
Wow. You know what? This is going to be a cop-out, but there's one person I would sit down with, and that'd be Joe Biden right now. And I would talk to Joe Biden, and I would really, really try to make a point that while the climate czar is great, we knew a new economic model that's inclusive of all, based around the circular economy. And I would try to say, here's the playbook that's happening right now in Chicago, get it in legislation, put incentives around this, and mandate it. And I think that would be legendary for me. And I think the other thing that would be really cool is that just to be able to go and work in Alaska with Tribal Nation and to go behind that culture, which I find amazing and wonderful. I can't wait. I'm so nervous. I'm like, oh my God, I'm all the talk amongst yourselves, just because it's such an opportunity. So we'll see. A lot to be excited about, Dave.
Amazing. Wow. Super. Yeah. I think we could keep on going. That's for sure. John, I'm super grateful to have you on here, and we should do this again. Would love to just, as these programs develop, like check in. I mean, even I can share some slides, some pictures on the ground of what's happening, but super great.
I'd love to. I mean, you're a big part of our success, Dave, and any way we can support you, man, I'm in like that, dude.
All right. Well, let's make that absolutely happen. Love to do in the new year. And obviously we have a lot of stuff going on. You and I will be in conversations much sooner than later. But yeah, episode 20, it is 3:30. We're going to wrap. We are bringing Josh Spodek back. You ever met Josh Spodek? Do you know?
It's just a great name, though. Isn't it just saying it's fun?
Yeah, he's he uses about like a trash, like a small bag of waste in the like entire year.
Yeah.
He lives in New York City. He's like complete. Yeah, I talked to him, and then like I realized I needed to get a hybrid car immediately.
Yeah, totally. You feel totally incompetent. I know
he like raises consciousness just talking to him. But we're going to be talking to him on Monday, and then we got Thursday. We're going to have John Hocevar from Greenpeace and Aaron Simon from World Wildlife.
Okay. So get that to me. I'll put it on the network because you're probably doing something massive with that.
We had a pretty big announcement about our 2021 plans, and we're excited to. We'll be launching that next Thursday. So, anyway, John, thank you again, my friend, and we will be in touch soon. And episode 20 of the SoulBuffalo Earth Report is a wrap. Have a great day, everybody.